Hi everybody, it's Kimberly and I'm back again. Today I wanted to talk about shadow work. Many of you have messaged me with questions about how do you facilitate your shadow work and how do you even know what to identify as shadow work. So let's talk about what shadow work is. So we have our conscious beings or a conscious part of ourselves that is, let's say, illuminated, right? Where the pieces of ourselves that we are aware of. And then there are pieces of ourselves that have been either suppressed or disowned, and they are buried in our subconscious. And many times we have or act out behaviors that are rooted in subconscious, at the subconscious level. So oftentimes in relationships, particularly in our twin flame relationships, when everything gets mirrored for us, there is this, you sort of get called to dig up those things that are sort of buried in the subconscious mind so that you can bring them out and bring them to light and create an awareness for them, which means the start of the healing process of those things. So more specifically, the shadow work is about taking, the dark pieces or the pieces that are in the dark and then bringing them into light. So that's where that concept comes from and why it's called that. And as I always say, awareness is the very first step of healing. And so doing the work. So the biggest question I've had from most of you is, how do I know what I need to work on? Well, it's pretty simple to identify if you look at your triggers and your patterns of behavior in relationships. So a lot of times those two things will be indicative of what it is in your shadow self. Now you may uncover something and not know what the root cause is or the core cause, and that's where you have to make the connection. So I'm going to help you try to do that. So let's take an example. So for example, a behavior in a relationship. A lot of people have a fear of abandonment, right? And so when you're afraid to be abandoned, a lot of times you are the person who runs or who walks away first because you're trying to control. It's like a control mechanism for not being left first, right? So you're trying to leave first. It's a fear of abandonment, or a fear of abandonment can manifest itself in many ways, but that's one way. So let's just say that this fear of abandonment keeps coming up and you keep being the runner in a relationship. And there's something in there that you need to look at and figure out why. So, okay, well, there's the first sign. I've identified something. I'm going to look at it deeper. Where's this stemming from? So, I like practical exercises. I know I've alluded to Teal Swan has some great exercises for doing your shadow work. And a lot of times it's, taking a piece of paper and drawing different columns and figuring out your relationship to certain behaviors and where it stems from and why you've disowned it or don't claim it in your conscious mind. But I'm going to just give it to you more simply. So fear of abandonment, I'll take you through mine. So I tend to be the runner. I have this fear of abandonment, and it comes from, I could trace it back many different places. So when I did this work, I went through from early childhood, as far as I could remember, that those feelings of being abandoned, all the way up to adulthood, to see those patterns and how they repeated and where it may have stemmed from. I had, She was in nursery school. When my mom would leave the school, it was like sub-level, and I remember just crying up through the stairs, like, no, don't go. I would cry for like 20 minutes after she would leave, and the poor teachers had to calm me down. That is probably one of the first signs of where I felt that feeling, where I started holding it in my vibration, was that young, 4 years old or however young I was. And then holding that in my vibration or suppressing it, it's still alive there in the subconscious mind. So I would manifest that in relationships where I would be abandoned. I also had a very pivotal experience. I just share things candidly here because I know you guys have asked me for very specific examples. So although it's personal, I'd rather share it so that you can learn from my experience. I had an experience when I was a teenager, and my parents took in a neighborhood little girl who they adored, and I felt very abandoned. It was like my awkward teenage years, and I was looking for approval, and I needed more support because I felt the most misunderstood at that time in my life. And instead, all of the attention was taken off of me and like given to this little girl. And I saw things about the situation that I didn't agree with, and I felt abandoned. And it's like this compilation, because you feel it usually not just once. Like I felt it as a little girl, and then I held it in my vibration, and then I encountered it again. And then in my adult relationships, I would encounter it too. And it was twofold. It was that I had the fear of abandonment, but then I also pulled in those who would abandon me. So you do hold, even if things are buried in your subconscious, you still act out of those things, and you still hold it in your vibration. So you can still pull in. Law of attraction is still at play there. You're still gonna, like, your fears, your suppressed things, a lot of times you're still pulling those things into you. They're a match for vibration at a soul level. So the only way to change that is to uncover, discover, reveal, shed light, become aware. And as I went through, and it was helpful to write on a piece of paper what each experience was, how old I was, and just connect the dots for myself, for my own self-awareness, and go, this is interesting. I was pulling this pattern in, and then when was it that I became the runner, or had that deep-rooted fear that caused me to have this behavior, this pattern of behavior that I repeated. And I'm laughing because it's like we can do this for every aspect of ourselves that you probably get mirrored back to you in relationships, right? And so if it was this scenario of running or of fear of abandonment, someone would keep holding up the mirror and go, why are you pushing me away? Why are you running away? Or why are you pushing me away? And a lot of times we don't even know why, right? So other examples of shadow things that you might find are, it could be anything. It could be anything from childhood trauma, or could be codependency, the narcissism, the your fears, your abusive behavior, projection. Projection is one, and Teal Swan again does a great job at explaining this, but I'll try to take a stab at it as well. That projection is one that, when you just own a piece of yourself, which is like a piece that you don't like, you'll often project it onto somebody else, right? Or you suppress it so far down that you judge it. So, for example, say, I'm trying to think of a good example. A good example would be you have a high standard of a certain type of wine that you drink or something like that. And you look at others and you're like, they're not drinking a nice wine, and you're judging them. Okay, so the core belief is not really about wine. The core belief is something about class and status, and that judgment is stemming from somewhere in you that has to do with something that you've suppressed. So oftentimes, if that scenario came up, oftentimes I find with clients, people I've talked to, that it's, it's something parental. It's maybe coming from a rough upbringing and cultivating the finer things in life. And then because you've so far suppressed the rougher upbringing, that you would judge things that were not up to the finer things in life that you've discovered. It's all about this disowned, suppressed discovery. So, and that's just a silly example, but there's so many examples. Anytime you find yourself judging something or somebody, it's because you're either projecting something from your own being onto them, or you have completely suppressed and disowned a piece of yourself that does not want to be that. So because you don't want to be that, you don't want to be drinking the low label wine, you want to be cultivating the finer things as you've done as an adult. But maybe that low label wine reminds you of this, it's a trigger for, this not so great upbringing that you had, right? With not a lot of money or whatever it was. And that's where that trigger can come from. So this stuff is not brain surgery or brain science. It is really just taking a deeper look at ourselves. And most people, when they do it, albeit when there is trauma, childhood trauma to look at, or repressed things, it can be a much deeper, longer, harder process. But for many of us, if we are coming to the point where we're ready to look at ourselves in this way, it can be a harmonious process of self-discovery and many aha moments that make us understand better where our own behaviors are coming from. And so is the awareness enough to heal it? Awareness is enough to bring it into light and become conscious of it. So once you are conscious of it, then it is your duty to stay conscious of it, be aware of it, and kind of catch yourself, the next time it comes up, and understand better where it's coming from in your being, so that you can eventually flush it out of your patterns and your behaviors. I believe awareness it's at least 50 to 60% of the healing. And then the rest of the healing comes through practicing being aware, consciously changing it. And because you are, many of those things that I just called out, like the mom leaving me at nursery school, the parents abandoning me in, teenage years, those things were painful. So in creating the awareness, there's a self-love that you also need to cultivate. The giving your inner child a hug, the forgiving your parents, the forgiving the culprits of this behavior, the forgiving yourself, all of that comes with this. So it's awareness and forgiveness and loving yourself. And that's how you heal the wounds. And some are, like I said, some people will heal wounds quicker depending upon their past experience, and some will have a much longer process to go through to delve deep and heal this, especially with repressed memories and repressed childhoods, because a lot of times the only method is to go through regression therapy to do that work. So think about that. See if maybe you can try some exercises on your own. I think you'll be surprised at how interesting and fun the self-discovery can be. Even if it brings up some painful emotions, let it come through you, and that's part of the healing forgiveness process and the self-love process and the awareness. So I hope that clarifies a bit for you guys. I am holding a Twin Flame free conference call this week on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and this will be Thursday, August 18th. And I hope to hear you guys on the call. If you'd like the information for the call and you haven't joined in with us yet, you can email me at transformationscapecod@gmail.com. That's transformations with an S, capecod@gmail.com. All right, you guys, have a great evening, and I'll see you soon. Bye.